turn on your cameras if you want. We'd love to see your faces, but certainly understand if you're not comfortable doing that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Brendan Hayes. I'm with the National Hemophilia Foundation. I'm the Director of Education for Innovative Therapies. We're so glad that you all are here this evening to join us. We are happy to have you. This particular workshop is part of a 4-part series. It is Hemophilia Treatment Now and the Future. And 2 weeks ago, we did gene therapy. Last week, we did innovative therapies. Tonight, we're doing clinical trials. And then we are finishing the series off next Tuesday night with communicating with your provider. So I know some of you have been on with us the whole time, and some of you are just joining us for the first time. We're really happy that you're here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So tonight's speaker is nurse educator Sandra Hibner. Sandra has a master's degree in nursing and a certification in hemostasis nursing. Sandra has been a registered nurse for over 45 years and has worked with as a coagulation resource nurse and hematology research coordinator from 1996 through 2019 at Dayton Children's Hemostasis and Thrombosis Center. Although Sandra retired in 2019, she remains active and connected with the bleeding disorders community. Sandra is a board member of the Southwestern Ohio Hemophilia Foundation and Family Annual Meeting of Hemophiliacs in Ohio, also known as FAM Ohio. She's planning coordinator for FAM Ohio's annual Family Education Weekend. And in addition, she has served as the regional representative for the Great Lakes region and the National Hemophilia Foundation, and is former member of the Global Hemophilia Network Support Committee. So that's a lot, Sandy. We are so happy and blessed to have you with us tonight. I know we're in for a real treat, so welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I wish I could see all of you, but I know you're out there. I'm very happy to still be connected with the hemophilia community or bleeding disorders community, as you are all heroes in my book. But let's talk today about clinical trials, the basics, what you need to know. I have no disclosures at this time. Our objectives today are to discuss the basics of clinical trials. And our objectives for this presentation are to develop an understanding of the clinical trials process, identify the possible benefits and risks of participating in a clinical trial, identify questions to ask your provider to determine if participating in a clinical trial is right for you, and to locate clinical trials and steps needing to enroll. Also, to understand the informed consent process and your responsibilities to participate in a clinical trial. Many of you have the opportunity to be in a clinical trial at your HTC, but also many of you may have to go to look for a clinical trial in a different HTC. So we'll discuss how that can occur. So what are clinical trials and studies? Clinical trials are actually research studies performed in people that are aimed at evaluating a medical, surgical, or behavioral intervention. Clinical trials are the research studies designed to evaluate the outcomes or interventions on health-related biomedical and behavioral outcomes. So for a little fun thing, let's have a poll and have any of you ever participated in a clinical trial? Guess I'll do it too.
So is that poll working for you, Patty?
It came up well on my screen.
Okay, good.
Well, we could all bet what our numbers are going to be, but
All right, I think that's probably everyone who's going to participate. So I'll go ahead and end the poll now.
And 33% yes and 67% no. Well, that's really pretty impressive that 1/3 has been involved in a clinical trial. I think that's good. Thank you for doing that. Next slide. Clinical trials. What are the goals of clinical trials? Well, basically to determine if a specific treatment, prevention strategies, and behavioral approaches are safe and effective. And actually, when we look at that goal, it's a pretty big goal. And it kind of, if the whole clinical trial can continue to fruition, one of the final stages of the research process, stage 4, was where this goal will be fulfilled. It also to improve disease prevention, detection, treatment, and quality of life. And another goal is to guide medical practice, evidence-based. And you can think of numerous examples of how clinical trials have helped change therapy for patients. And one of the ones that came to my mind was women used to have yearly pap smears. Well, after 40 years of women having yearly pap smears, the data showed that older women don't actually need a pap smear every year. So that medical treatment has changed. We talk about the clinical trial phases. So preclinical is done in the lab, usually using animal models. So that is where the test is and the drug is used, is tested on an animal to see if the desired effect of the drug has effectiveness and safety. It has effectiveness, it is safe, and the toxicities. So that's the very first step. After the preclinical, we have phase 1. And that is done usually performed in a smaller group of people and usually healthy volunteers with the goal to just to determine safety. Is it safe to give? Now with hemophilia trials, phase 1 studies can also be done with patients with hemophilia. However, sometimes maybe the dose of the medication will be less and it will be an escalating dose. So the first 5 patients in the trial would get a smaller dose. And if that's safe, we would go to a little larger dose on up. Then we move to the phase 2. Phase 2 is done in larger groups of people affected with the disease or condition being studied. The goal is to determine effectiveness and to further study safety as well. And phase 3 is even a larger group of people, a usually longer time in the study. And the people are affected by the disease or the condition being studied. It confirms effectiveness, it monitors side effects, and compares it to the standards of similar treatment. And then phase 4 is a post-marketing. And sometimes, well, actually, sometimes with phase 3, there'll be an extension study. And that would be, when you think about a study may take 2 or 3 years. And if someone enrolls right at the beginning of the study and they're in the study for 2 years, and someone enrolled later in the study, they're also in the study for 2 years. So it can take a while. So sometimes there's an extension study where after you've completed your 2 years in the phase 3, you can complete a little longer. And it's usually not as a strict schedule. It's a little easier part of the study, but they monitor everything just as well. And then phase 4 is post-marketing. After the product is FDA approved, it's still a study to make sure to follow up on side effects, efficacy. They also study cost and how well it is utilized. And these studies can take 8 years or more. So probably a lot of you are thinking, how did that COVID vaccine get out so quickly if it takes 8 years? And we were able to have a vaccine in 8 months or 10 months. And that was because everyone worked 24/7. The data was turned over quickly and everything just was 24/7. And if we did our studies that way, they could be done that quickly as well. But when you're using a regular schedule and a schedule people can be in clinical trials and live their life, it takes much longer. But all the phases were completed in the COVID vaccine. Okay. Lack of diversity in clinical trials. Well, unfortunately, there's numerous historical examples of exploitation of marginalized groups. And the one that, well, some groups are, because of this, some groups are unwilling or distrustful about participating in clinical trials. And the one that most people think of right away is the US public health study at Tuskegee concerning syphilis. Arguably the most infamous biomedical research study in the US, and it was carried out by the US and the Public Health Service in 1932 to 1972. And the premise of the study was to check how syphilis affected people, their organs, their life. And they had 600 people in the study. 400 had contracted syphilis, 200 were not, were free of syphilis. But what happened is they continued to study and they didn't give the patients penicillin once that was found to be an effective treatment. So consequently, many died, and still with syphilis, died of syphilis. Their wives were infected, and some of their children were even born with syphilis. So that was a very unfortunate, embarrassing, really, study. And there are just numerous checks and balances, so this kind of thing cannot happen again. And we'll go over those further on in the treatment or in the presentation. So lack of good data could skew results. Some people are afraid of that. And that's true. If someone is a study participant and maybe lies or makes up the data or something, you know, that could be a problem. However, I want to assure you that the data is really, really scrutinized, and it's checked and rechecked by numerous people along the way. And then also our recruitment efforts need to target diverse groups of participants. And we're really trying, there's different ways that we are really trying to get more diversity in clinical trials. And one of the ways that we're trying to get more diversity is the FDA's initiative that's entitled Enhance Equity in Clinical Trials. And the goals of this initiative are to identify barriers to enrollment for underrepresented populations, improve, data collection and quality for underrepresented populations, increase trainings, education, and communication in order to increase clinical trial enrollment for underrepresented populations, and to increase training not only for the participants, but for the clinical trial investigators and researchers. Now, one thing about hemophilia, with patients having that, there's only so many people, as you know, with hemophilia. So many times the studies really are globally performed. So there is some amount of diversity because studies are being done in India and studies are being done in Thailand and studies are done in the United States and Europe. So it does, sometimes we do have a little bit more diversity than some of the studies. So how do we ensure safe and ethical research? There's many organizations and review boards that is their job, just to ensure safe and ethical research. We look at the Health and Human Services, the HHS, Office for Human Research Protections, OHRP. And then we talk about guidelines for good clinical practice, and that for short is called GCP. And that's an acronym that's thrown around quite a bit when you're discussing clinical trials, when you're deciding if you're site would like to be involved, if you're writing the informed consent, everything has to fall under the guidelines for GCP. Data and monitoring safety boards. Now all the clinical trials go through the institutional review boards there, and an institutional review board is located at every site that does a research site. And it's a group of very intelligent, highly educated people who understand research, and they monitor every clinical protocol. And you have to have a yearly review of the clinical protocol and what's going on with the study with these people. And the Food and Drug Administration are quite involved. And again, that's where the institutional review boards, the IRBs. And then there's multiple protocol reviews. You just don't do your study, take it to the IRB one time. You have to take it to the IRB every time you have a serious adverse event. If you make a change in the protocol, it goes back for review. And so it's highly scrutinized. And then the HIPAA privacy rule. And I think we all know about HIPAA, but when you think about a clinical trial, be assured that your name and your information is coded. It's not your name that goes in for the study. You might be HR 2296. And all of that information about you, about your clinical trial, about the code that says what name equals what person, is all locked up, and it's locked in a locked file, and it's in a locked privacy place, and it's ruled by a nurse. Possible benefits of participating in clinical trials. There's a lot of benefits. It may be you want to access a new treatment or therapy before it's available to the public. You might decide to do a clinical trial because you will receive regular medical attention from the research team. Most clinical trials, many times you're seeing bi-weekly the first couple months and then monthly. Help improve treatment option for others with your condition or disorder. So many of the gentlemen that I've worked with that went in the hemophilia trials understood that their blood brothers before them participated in clinical trials and helped improve the treatment for them. And they feel that sense of altruism to pay it forward. Receive the new treatment at no cost. Your trial study drug would not be a cost to you. And you are reimbursed for travel expenses in most cases. You're also many times reimbursed for your time, but no one gets rich being in a clinical trial. I mean, you get compensation to help with things that you need to do to be in the clinical trial, but it's not where someone would want to be in a clinical trial and make money, because that would be the wrong reason. And I have seen people choose all of these reasons of why they're in a clinical trial. So what are the possible risks participating in clinical trials? And there are risks. There may be unknown side effects to the new treatment. There may be something that happens to you that hasn't happened to anyone else. The new treatment might not work for you, or it could stop working at some point during the trial. And that maybe is thinking a bit of gene therapy. There may be financial costs that are not reimbursed. While we try very, very hard to figure out what it would take financially for someone to be in a clinical trial, there might be other burdens, like maybe you have to get a babysitter because the day you're coming in for your clinical trial, your child is ill or something, and that may not be reimbursed. It can be a significant time commitment, and that is true because research study, our offices are open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Occasionally, are some weekend hours, but that's rare. So they are, usually your visits would be during regular business hours. And so if you needed to miss work and you weren't compensated, that could be, a financial constraint, and also it does take time. The administration process for the new treatment may be more complex than your current treatment. So that makes sense. Maybe you're doing one kind of treatment that's oral, and now this is going to be an intravenous treatment. Might be something you have to learn. You may be ineligible to participate in future clinical trials. And that is true with the gene therapy trials at this time. If you would be involved in a gene therapy trial, and if it maybe worked for a while and then didn't work, you may think you would like to try it again. And at this point, that is not allowed. That doesn't mean it won't be allowed in the future, but at this point, it's not. And usually, if you have done a medication for hemophilia, you can be in future clinical trials, but there's a time, maybe 6 months ago you were in a trial, it's over, you have to be off of that medication for a certain amount of time before you would be on a clinical trial for another therapy. Possible risk, some more risk in participating in gene therapy clinical trials. The treatment cannot be stopped or undone once administered. Now that's right, this is talking about gene therapy. So when you think of gene therapy, once you've taken the vector with, it can't be stopped. It's not like we stop in the middle or we can't undo it. So you have to know that you've signed up for that and you're going to take it. Okay. You could have a reaction to the vector used to deliver the gene therapy into your body. The effects, the treatment effects may not be permanent. So some people who have had gene therapy got a rise in their factor 8 and factor 9, but the rise was not sustained. Or maybe it was higher and then it went lower. It may still be effective and may be better than what they had prior, but the higher level was not permanent. And redosing may not be possible. And in the future it may be, but at this point it's not. So possible questions to ask your healthcare provider if you are interested in participating in a clinical trial. Are there clinical trials that I'm eligible to participate in? A lot of the providers will discuss all this with you, and some of them may have open trials at your center where you can participate, or you may need to go to a different center. Am I eligible for more than one? Can you explain the difference between the trials? So if there were 2 open trials, one trial might be a better fit for you, and that is a good discussion point. Why is the treatment being studied expected to be an improvement from the current treatment? Maybe it's a longer acting product. So good questions. Who can I contact to learn more about the details of the study? The clinical trial research associates usually will be named next to the study, and they'll give you some information of how to get in touch and to get more answers. Do you know of any new studies that may come about in the future that could be a good fit? There might be something coming down the road that your physician is aware of, and he might say, let's wait for, encourage you to wait for that. It might be a better fit for you. Core clinical research team, know your team. Well, your principal investigator is the leader of the trial at the site. He is a physician. He oversees the activities of the research team, and he is ultimately responsible for the entire protocol and for all the data and and for the entire study. So he takes ultimate control. Now, under him are something called sub-investigators or sub-Is. And sub-Is are other physicians that work at the same institution. They've been educated on the protocol. They're not in charge of the protocol, but they, suppose as you're a study participant, you need to call in the treatment center for something, and the principal investigator isn't on call, and you get the sub-investigator. He would be able to answer your questions and give you advice and tell you what to do because he is educated on the protocol. Then you have clinical research associates or clinical research coordinator, and they are the person that connects the whole team. The whole team of the PIs, sub-Is, the research nurse, that clinical team, but also teams in the hospital. Let's say you need to get an EKG. That person would make the appointment for your EKG, make sure it's billed properly so it isn't billed to your insurance because it's part of the study. They're kind of the coordinator. And then the research nurse is responsible for patient care, participant care, including placing of IVs and maybe administering the study medication. And in some protocols may perform the physical exams. But sometimes in a smaller research places where I came from, the CRC and the CRA and the research nurse was all one person. The informed consent. The informed consent is a very wordy document, sometimes up to 20 pages. But the goal of the informed consent is for you to understand your rights and your responsibility. It's the process of providing detailed, critical information about a study so that the participant, parent, or guardian can make an informed decision on participation. We want the patient to be totally aware of what they're getting into. The informed consent is signed by any participant 18 years or older, and then there is an assent for 7 years old to 17 years. Many times the phase studies, will go down. They start with adults and then adolescents, and then if all that goes well, children are involved in research studies. So we do ask the children 7 to 17 to sign on the dotted line as well. And I think maybe some of you might be thinking, what if that child doesn't want to do that? And I always thought that too, but that never happened. So I'm glad to say that their parents educated them well enough and that they went along with it. Also, sometimes there could be children younger than 7 years of age in a clinical trial, but they usually don't have to sign the assent. The informed consent continues throughout the entire study. And participation in a clinical research study is completely voluntary. You may leave the trial at any point for any reason. If it's just too much for you, you don't want to do it anymore, your circumstances have changed, you can leave. You are still guaranteed to be treated by your doctor, to get your regular medication, and there be no consequences in a negative way for you leaving the trial. So this informed consent is not a contract. It's not a binding contract that you legally have to stay in the trial. It's voluntary. However, that being said, it's a very important document, and it tells you, when you sign it, you're saying you're going to give it your best shot. You're going to really try to be a good study participant, even though it's not a legally binding contract. So the informed consent document includes all the details of the study. Sometimes it's 20 pages long, but it's written at a 4th grade level. So it's very easy to understand, but it's very detailed. So it begins with the reason for the study, the name of the study, and why we're studying this, why we're doing this study to begin with. How long will the study last? It will say very clearly, you'll be in the study 36 months, for example. What will the participant need to do? And it'll detail each visit, what you'll need to do. There'll be bullet points under each visit that very clearly says what you do at each visit. You know, maybe you get an EKG every third visit, or maybe you get blood drawn after the medication every other visit. All that will be detailed in the informed consent. A list of medical tests and procedures participants will need to follow, like I just mentioned. Potential benefits and risk of participating. So every benefit that they know of and every risk that can happen is listed. Confidentiality, anonymity, and personal health information protectors. As I said, your information is confidential, it's locked up, it's not shared with anyone else besides that in the study. And if it is shared with someone else, those are all listed. If the FDA needs to know that, your information that's listed on the informed consent. Compensation information, if any, and that's spelled out and it can't be changed. So say, you know, we would have to go to the IRB if for some reason you requested additional funding. Who to contact if you have questions, and there's a number to call during business hours, and then there's numbers to call after hours. So questions to ask the clinical research coordinator before giving consent. So here's some really good questions. What has been the experience with the current product in previous phases of the trial? Will I have to stop my current treatment? Most likely, yes. Where will this study take place and how often will I have to travel there? And will my study costs, travel costs be covered or reimbursed? Are there any additional costs I will be responsible for? And how could participating in this study affect my daily life? What are the follow-up procedures? And are there plans for an extension study that allow me to continue to receive treatment? Those are all really great questions and something you need to know. So let's talk about the steps of enrolling in a clinical trial. You would contact the trial's research coordinator. Take part in a screening call to determine potential eligibility. So I've had people call and think that maybe they're interested in a trial and they've maybe done some reading about it, but the more we talk, we realize it's not a good fit. So the call doesn't determine you will be accepted, but it at least determines that you appear to be eligible. Send required documentation to the research coordinator. If you are going to enter a trial that's at your local HTC where you already receive care, the research coordinator will be able to get all the documentation. But if you have to send your records from another institution, you'll have to do a little legwork because you'll have to give permission and make sure that those records are transferred to us or to wherever the study is being performed. Then you attend an on-site visit, and that's your screening visit. You will definitely have blood work and some different procedures, most likely, and then go over again everything about the visit. You'll attend the visit to see if it's going to work. And after they get all the information back from all the tests that you had on your on-site visit, and if you fit the criteria and the parameters, you will find out if you've been accepted to participate. What to expect in participating in a clinical trial. You will visit the clinical trial site as needed to receive the treatment being studied and to receive medical tests to determine how the treatment is affecting you. The research coordinator will work with you throughout the study to schedule your visits, answer your questions, and connect you to other study staff. So let's say the schedule says you have to have visit 2 to 4 weeks. So you have a little time, a little parameter of when you need to fit in your visit. But it's very important that you're able to make those visits and that you fit into the parameters listed in the informed consent and on the protocol. In between visits to the study site, you will monitor your own well-being. And if you experience anything unusual, notify the research coordinator immediately. Could be a side effect or it could be related changes in health that are unrelated. I mean, things happen to people that have nothing to do with the study, but we need to be aware of that. If that's a serious adverse event that is consequence of the study, or if it's a totally different experience, we need to know that. If the study team at any point determines that it's too risky or dangerous for participation to continue, they will safely remove you from the trial. So there's a protocol on how to remove someone as well. And so that would be followed if it, for some reason, suppose it was a hemophilia medication and you're having too many bleeds, it's not working for you, you would be taken off. At the end of the study, you will receive medical tests and procedures to compare your health from before and after receiving the treatment. And that, of course, is good knowledge for you. A member of the study team will discuss the possibility to continue treatment as a part of an extension study if the option is available, and that is something you are interested in. So sometimes, as I said before, an extension study is an option. You would still be in the clinical trial, but it's just a little easier schedule, but we're still documenting and wanting to know everything that happens to you. After the study ends, there will be a follow-up period in which participants are contacted periodically to discuss any changes in their health since the end of the study. And I know of a study that my friend was involved with 30 years ago. And it was a study studying young girls and when they were 12 and 13. And it went on for almost 40 years. And she still calls them. She was the nurse coordinator or actually the CRC in that study. And she still calls them and they answer the phone and just give the little, it's nothing binding, but there is still follow-up and then that many years later. So we've got some tests to do. So we're going to test your knowledge. So we're going to have a quiz. So the benefits and risks of participating in a clinical trial are always the same. True or false?
And you guys feel free to jump in and put your answers in the chat.
Is that how they should do it?
Yeah.
Okay. How long do I wait?
Yeah, I'd say go ahead and move on.
Okay, well, I saw a couple of your answers, and of course that is false. The benefits and risks participating in a clinical trial are not always the same. Each clinical trial has its own unique set of benefits and risks. You will be notified of what they are in your informed consent document. Okay, our next one. If you're interested in participating in a clinical trial, your healthcare provider can help answer any questions you may have. True or false? One answer. Two. Well, the answer that we have is true. But I think what Dawn wrote true-ish, and I think there is some of that. Your healthcare provider is an excellent person to talk to if you're interested in participating in a clinical trial. They can help answer your questions and may be able to provide you with the information on specific clinical trials, but they can connect you with the right person to give you the answers if they do not know the answers themselves. If you're interested in participating, an informed consent document is a contract that you sign agreeing to participate in the entire length of the study. And of course, that everyone in. That is false. It's not a contract. It's true that you are saying that you will try your best, but it is not a legal contract and you do not have to stay the entire time. Participation in the clinical trial, as we said, is voluntary and you may leave the trial at any time. During the initial screening call, the research coordinator will notify you whether you've been accepted as a participant. And the answer for that is false. The research coordinator would notify you whether you can move on. You will not know if you're able to be in the study until after you've completed both the initial screening call, the on-site screening visit, and the research team has reviewed all your information and medical tests to verify your eligibility. And sometimes it's going well, and then something in that first visit is out of the parameters and the person is unable to be accepted. What phase of a clinical trial involves testing a treatment in a small group of people for the first time? Well, I don't know you, Maggie, but I like you. Yours keeps coming up. Okay, the answer for the small group of people is phase 1. Phase 1 is a clinical trial. It's done in a small group of people, as we've said, usually in healthy volunteers. However, with hemophilia, many times they also have hemophilia. It depends how the trial is designed.
Great. Thank you so much. I am going to jump in here and we're going to talk a little bit about how to find an open clinical trial. Now that you have heard all this great info and you're up to speed on what clinical trials are, I think it might be fun to actually go and find some that you might be interested in. So, how do we find an open clinical trial? So we're going to go to clinicaltrials.gov and I'm going to walk you through how to actually find a few studies. So let me share my screen. Okay. Are you guys able to see my share?
It's seeing me. Okay.
Did it come up?
It says that NHF has started screen sharing, but it's not up.
Patty, are you able to see the screen share?
No, I see the same thing, that NHF has started screen sharing.
All right, let me stop and try again. Isn't it funny how there are always technical difficulties no matter how much you rehearse and you think you have it all down, and yeah, it looks like Try one more time. My apologies. It looks like my mouse is now frozen. This isn't good. So let's do this. So those of you who have a device, could be your smartphone or an iPad with you, let's go ahead and go to clinicaltrials.gov.
Hey, Brendan, do you want me to share my screen? Do you want me to show it and see if I can do that?
That would be great. I don't.
All right, hold on one second. No, it won't let me. Sorry. We may have even lost Brendan.
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it looks like, so it says that I can't share my screen while you are sharing. And it looks like Sandy is also frozen.
Yeah. Patty, can you try to share your screen and then it'll kick me off maybe?
I just tried that. I don't think it worked. No.
Brendan, if you want to, maybe if you are able to get your mouse to work at all and just shut out and then join us in a minute, I am happy to, any of us would be happy to then, it might take you off so we can share our clinicaltrials.gov.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It literally, my mouse is working and it literally won't let me stop the share, so.
No worries.
Let me just talk through it.
Yeah.
There's Sandy. She's back. You were frozen.
Oh, that's good. They never freeze in a nice position, do they? You never noticed that? It's like,
So true.
So we're going to go ahead and walk through the clinicaltrials.gov site. So on that first screen, what you'll see is you'll see an area that says find a study. And you've got a couple of options. You can choose recruiting and not yet recruiting studies or all studies. If you choose all studies, it's going to give you all studies. So it'll give you the ones that have maybe had to stop for various reasons and those that are complete. So I always like to use the recruiting and not yet recruiting studies myself. And that enables me to actually see just ones that are currently active that I can potentially go to. Then condition or disease. So here, what you could do is you could type in the word hemophilia and you're
Nice. This is great. I can see it.
Yes, it looks like maybe we lost Brendan. So, or Brendan, can you hear us?
Her audio is completely off, it looks like.
Okay.
So I think we did
So
lose her.
Patty, do you want to, if you are able to escape from the presentation and go actually to clinicaltrials.gov since you are successfully screen sharing?
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Thanks.
Okay, can everyone see this?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm happy to talk it through. Sandy, anyone can dive in for, I mean, we really wanted this to be interactive here where folks maybe even have it up on their own screen so you can start to play with what might interest you. So I know Brendan touched on the status section at the top, and then you can, type in a disease or condition. So go ahead and type a bleeding disorder in. There you go, hemophilia. It gives you options. I mean, some of these are very specific. You could type in von Willebrand disease. We have all sorts of folks on the call, probably factor 13 deficiency, whatever it may be, right? And you can see if there are studies, for any of these types of conditions. Country is probably another really useful one. Just saying. Often people talk about travel with clinical trials. I think, Sandy, you mentioned if it's not happening at your HTC, but having it be within your country probably is going to be helpful for eligibility. So if you want to narrow, do whatever you can to narrow in advance. Do you want to add anything here?
No, that looks good. Let's see what comes up for factor 13. That's pretty rare. So. Looks like.
So no studies found that are recruiting for factor 13.
There were studies of 15 years ago for the newer medication that came out. There we go. There's quite a few.
So yeah, I mean, this is where, I think it is and I'm Kate Damacher, by the way. I'm the Vice President of Education, whose voice you all hear now chiming in. Apologize, I can start my video here too. So I think what's really interesting, and I'd love to hear how others use this site, is it can get kind of technical very quickly. So all of a sudden there might be like looking at that second one, you might see, some of the drug names that you might have heard some of those terms, but then all of a sudden there's other things that get thrown in there. So it's worthwhile digging in, or that's where it's great to play around and write down those questions. So you can bring them to your provider and be like, I don't even know what this means. What is this study really about? But this is a great way to get in and read that brief description, the summary, and understand what are the key concepts that are happening here. And, is it even still, is it completed? Do they have a lot of the dates and some of the key pieces of information you might need, as you go through this. They also, the nice thing too is there's by study type or estimated enrollment, there's a little I there. So if there are some of these researchy type terms, what's an interventional, what are the different types, that has the little I next to it, and you can click on the word study type, and it can give you some little background and information, so you can kind of get hopefully a little better sense of any terms that are unclear as you go through this. And so I think the important thing is to look at what is it actually about? Is it, in the context of a lot of what we discussed tonight, it was really about, depending on the phase of the clinical trial, are these, working? Are they, effective in doing what they're, supposed to do? Are they safe, which is the earlier phase, right? But the clinicaltrials.gov covers a lot. So it might actually be, sometimes you'll see something for a drug that is already been approved, but they're sort of trying to understand its impact for a different function in our bodies, potentially, or on a certain particular thing, right? And so that's where it's useful to see exactly what the study is really trying to get at. And I think this one is actually for a very particular population, right? So this is specifically around preventing postpartum hemorrhage, so postnatally, right? So, it's very much more narrow, which is helpful to understand, and good to see this kind of research happening, actually.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kate, for jumping in.
You're back. Yay.
Yeah, and the good thing is you can actually go and you can save your search results. You can print them out. You can download them into a PDF and print them out and bring them with you to your appointment as well. So, Patty, if you could go back and share the slide deck again. and we'll finish up. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about NHF resources for the future therapies. Next slide. Okay, so really here, you know, I want to, I'm going to drop the link into the chat for the Future Therapies website. And we've got, you know, frequently asked questions. We've got a gene therapy glossary. We've got a great little video, lots of webinars about gene and innovative therapies. We have news and more. So there's lots of resources. In fact, there's the actual website at the bottom of the screen, and you can take a quick screen grab of that or take a picture with your smartphone. Next slide, please. So NHF Community Voices in Research, or CVR, just wanted to highlight, you know, we're talking about clinical trials, which is research. So this is another piece of work that NHF is doing. And, you know, there are lots of benefits for being enrolled in CVR for our community members. So you get your own personal dashboard. You can participate in virtual advisory panels. Many times those are paid. You get your personal CVR record. You have access to educational resources at your fingertips. And then there's data in there on the State of the Science Summit. Next slide, please. So to summarize this great session that we had tonight, you know, clinical trials are complex. It's a complex process. And if it's something that you're interested in participating in, it's important that you understand some things. So first off, the overall process for enrolling and participating in a clinical trial, you know, we talked a lot about that tonight. So hopefully you have a much better idea. There are possible benefits and risks for every clinical trial. And, you know, we walked through some of those and gave you a lot of great questions that you can ask your provider. Participation is voluntary, and you can leave the trial at any time if it's not working out for you for whatever reason. So recognizing that, you know, many of these trials have long-term commitments required. So I know for gene therapy trials, they're up to 15 years. You know, Sandy just mentioned one too during her presentation where it was over 30 years, they were still checking in. And, you know, consult your provider and discuss how participating in clinical trials could affect you. And then also visit NHF's website for more information on clinical trials and other information about bleeding disorders. So with that, Patty, I know that we have another poll that we would like to do for those of you who are still on. And these responses, we definitely want to thank our partners in education. So that was on the last slide, the next slide. And yeah, so Patty, if you want to just start those polls.
Yep, it should be up now.
Yeah, so these are anonymous. And so, you know, we don't know who's answered how, but we want to just make sure that you all know that. So you can scroll down. There's, I think, 6 questions total. And then you just hit submit when you're done. And while we're waiting on all those, if anyone has any questions for Sandy, we'd love to hear them now. So please unmute and let us know if there's anything that you're curious about.
I have a quick question. This is Dawn, and I failed the test miserably. So that's actually really funny. But I was wondering, Sandy, if you can explain the difference between studies and trials. So oftentimes we hear sort of this interchange. You talked very specifically about clinical trials for treatments, but what about the studies that our population always participates in? Like the old UDC and those kinds of things where we're gathering information. How do they fit in with clinical trials?
A lot of people use the names synonymously, but there is probably a little bit of difference, and you really explained it well when you talked about the UDC. It's a type of study where you're just collecting information, and that's usually more of called a study. But sometimes the clinical trials, people refer to them as studies as well. Tonight, I think we did talk more about a medication or some sort of treatment. But a lot of times studies will just be follow-up, just where you're talking about your life. And that would be more of a study because we're not trialing your life. We're just taking in information. So there's numerous different kinds of studies and research. But you kind of explained it pretty well when you said UDC. I would consider that more of a study then. But clinical trials, I think of more with a specific treatment.
Okay, thank you. Because I do hear that the terms interchanged a lot.
They do, they are. And I
Thank you.
don't know that we think that through all the time.
Sandy, I really appreciated how you touched on the information around the COVID vaccines. I know that that is a question that lots of people have. And, I've heard some people say as well that, because we're in a public health crisis, all of the resources and energy were focused on, finding those vaccines. And so they sort of were able to sort of move up in the line, so to speak. They didn't have to wait until all these other ones got through the process. So yeah, thanks so much for highlighting that for us.
I think that is, people are concerned about how did it come out so quickly and all that. But all those phases were, used and they went through the proper steps, but just at warp speed. I believe it was called Operation Warp Speed. And, if you work 24/7 and you weren't dealing with people who, some people take longer to get their information in, when everyone had to get it in, it could go that fast.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions before we finish up? Well, thank you everyone for being on the call tonight. We really appreciate having you. Again, we've got one more workshop next week, and it's going to be a really fun one. It's communicating with your provider, and it's going to be pretty interactive. And so we're hoping that you all will join us next week. And then I also did want to let you know too that we have 2 more series coming up in November and December. So we've got lots of great educational content to share with our community for the rest of the year.
Great.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And thanks to the NHF education team for helping me out. And thanks everyone for bearing with our technical difficulties. Have a wonderful evening.